Hey there, welcome to Business Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Neal DiPentino. We have a great guest with us today. He's going to be here to help elevate your business, and he's an EOS enthusiast, a strategic coach, 10X member. He's from Fort Worth, Texas, and he's the founder of FinElevate. Please welcome to the show, Colin Sanburg. Colin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neal. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I actually said the name correctly. I'm known for screwing up names really badly, but I think we made it through. I just screwed up the rest of it. No, we're kidding. We're good. So glad that you're here with us today. Man, you were just talking a little bit offline about your time there in Fort Worth and a little bit about what you're doing and everything. I'm so happy to have you here so we can share it with our guests and kind of let them know what you do and maybe what your strategies, what you do can maybe help them in their businesses. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of get to know our guests a little bit. So Colin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So a little about myself. That's a loaded question. Yeah. So, I do live here in Fort Worth. I'm married for 15 years, going on 16. I've got 3 kids and really all I've ever done in my career is small business. So I, made the decision to be an entrepreneur when I was 20 or 21 and started pursuing that goal. And now 20, 25 years later, this is all I've ever really done. So I, worked at Home Depot, worked at, Walmart, that kind of thing when I was a kid. But
yeah,
for the most part, this is where I'm at now.
I love it. Working at Home Depot and Walmart and that kind of stuff. I mean, that kind of builds, that kind of gets you going, kind of gets you a taste of business and everything. And maybe some of the stuff that's out there, maybe you don't think about it too much when you're a kid, but at the end of the day, when you look back at it, it's those experiences that you have that kind of maybe help elevate you to the next level in the business that you're in now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I always kind of joke, one of my other jobs, my first jobs was working at Subway. And on my second day, they made me open by myself. And so I always joked that everything I learned about customer service, I learned on my second day at Subway when I had to open by myself. And I had no clue, as you would imagine, it did not go super well. I had no idea what I was doing. It was a complete unmitigated disaster. I didn't know how to make the meatballs. I couldn't, the bread luckily is pretty straightforward, but I mean, I couldn't figure out there's, when you go to put all the stuff in the little chill, when you're sliding the sandwich down the line and there's all the little bins that have all the ingredients, I couldn't figure out how to get the metal sections in there right. So they're all just sitting down there, the bottom of all the vegetables is frozen. It was bad. But, I learned that, an apology goes a long way and people seeing that you're working honestly to try and overcome whatever the situation goes a long way. And they usually give you a lot of grace if you lead with those two things.
Well, yeah, if you're authentic about, the way you handle that kind of situation, people really buy into that as well. It's not about trying to cover it up. It's not going to help you because there's obviously, in that case, there's no way to cover it up. Exactly. Not even with a big old piece of bread, Yeah.
And to that point, what the other thing that I later used in my entrepreneurial career is this realization that sometimes screwing up things really bad the first time, it points out all the holes and then you become an expert at how these things are supposed to work. If it just works the first time you try it or, it just seems pretty easy, you don't have to dig deep to really become an expert. But when something's a complete disaster and you go, well, I failed in 27 different ways, you now have 27 new things you're going to go learn and just by the nature of it. So Absolutely.
I was kind of, I love what you were saying. I was thinking as you were talking about the little bins with all the stuff and everything, it's kind of business is kind of like that. I mean, if you're a business owner, there's all these little bins of things that you have to be prepared for, the hiring, dealing with employees, with, bills, your finances, marketing, the whole 9 yards. So, it was, I think there was something there. I don't know, but it just, to me, in my mind, the way it works, I kind of thought that was what I was thinking. And so tell us a little bit about FinElevate. What is this all about?
Yeah. So my latest company, I'll give you a little bit of background first, as I probably should have done instead of talking about Subway.
That's okay.
but I own multiple different businesses. I started out my entrepreneurial career. It was kind of a turnaround project. The business was really struggling from a financial standpoint. And similar to my Subway story, that gave me the perspective on like the appreciation for getting the financial part of a business right. And, you could have a great product and happy customers and all of that. But if the financial part of your business isn't working, similar to your line, nobody wants sandwiches that don't have any condiments on them. So, you have to have all the pieces of the business working or none of it works. And so what I ended up doing for my own businesses was basically, as I, hired CEOs or partnered with someone who was already the CEO of one of my companies, it enabled me to focus on that financial piece of the business, because that's so rare that companies have someone on the team. It's so rare that the founder or the CEO is really passionate about that side of the business. And so that allowed me to really focus on it. And essentially that created the concept that's now FinElevate, which is, this is something I'm passionate about doing. I love helping other business owners. I love working on the financial challenges of a business, learning about the business model, figuring out how to make the most of it. And so that just basically became my latest company when I realized, hey, this is something I should offer beyond my own companies, something I've come up with a unique way to approach it. And I think we can add a lot of value to a lot of companies.
So you talk about a unique way. So give me a little bit of an idea of what makes it unique.
Yeah. So the natural problem, and again, I've done this for my own businesses historically. I've done the bookkeeping and accounting, financial part of the business from the ground up, right? And what I always realized was like you end up chasing your tail half the time. You're doing all the basic stuff that's very low value. There's always some sort of a fire to put out, and so you're never doing the proactive things that make the business better. You're just kind of like treating it as a necessary evil. And so when I realized that, I even had that struggle when I got out of my business. Still owning them, but working on them from the outside, I still ran into that same problem. And the challenge was that we didn't really have like a true north that we were guiding all of our efforts toward. It was kind of the true north was like survive the day, get all the basic stuff done, enter the bills, pay the vendors, and let's move on with life. And so what we've done with FinElevate is we have a simple 3-step process I'll explain fairly quickly for you. It is we first understand the goal of the entrepreneur. So I need to know whether your goal is to grow the business, become more profitable, improve your cash flow because you're struggling with cash. And we all know if we're struggling with cash, nothing else matters. Or is your goal to exit the business? And a lot of times it's one of those first three, and ultimately it's maybe an exit the business. And so with that goal in mind, we then create what we call the Fin Score, and it's just basically a report card for your business, right? It's simplifying the complexity of the financial statements. All the business owners that I've talked to, usually, especially when you're newer, you're looking at the financial statements. There's a ton of numbers going on. You feel like you can go down a rabbit hole in any direction. None of it's really, cohesive in a way that tells a story. So we created the Fin Score, and the Fin Score simplifies all of that. And it tells you, hey, a 76 is better than a 72. Mm-hmm. Simple. So with those two things in hand, we then have a playbook, and I put together a playbook. I'm the kind of nerd who reads all the financial books, all the Greg Crabtree stuff, all the Keith Cunningham stuff, read all that, digest it, love it. And so I built a playbook of 450 best practices that any business could use to improve their financial model. And once we know your goal and we know where you stand with the Fin Score, then the playbook kind of dictates itself. And with that in hand, we actually have actionable information. So instead of somebody waking up and going, I'd love to make progress on, being more profitable. Well, what does that really mean today? But we've distilled it down to a specific set of plays that will help you grow your profitability. And so that's what we do for companies is they keep working on their sales. They keep delivering their offering. We come in alongside them and work on the financial aspect of the business.
I love that. So when you're starting a business or you're running a business, I mean, obviously, I know this is true for me and for my business. There are certain things that I'm really good at. And there's certain things that pardon my French, but I really suck at it. Yep. And financial side of it is really it. And it's not necessarily that I'm really bad at it. It's just I don't pay as much attention to it because I'm so focused on the other part of the business, the part that actually brings the revenue in. And I could bring the revenue in, but sometimes I don't even know what that looks like, if it's profitable or whatever. Do you see that happening with a lot of the clients that you're working with?
Constantly. And that's really why I formed this. I mean, a big eye opener to me was when, the whole US was going through the COVID situation and PPP. And it was like business owners are suddenly feeling like, this might be a lifeline that I need to keep my business, keep my employees, but I don't understand it. It's kind of financial in nature. I got to coordinate this with a bank. There's a lot of complexity and uncertainty. And I think it exposed not only the banks and financial relationships we all had at the time, but it also just exposed that, to your point, it's not so much that people don't understand the importance of it, or even necessarily that they couldn't develop the skills. It's that they don't have the time and resources to dedicate to it. And so every day you're doing that, you're not selling, you're not perfecting your process, you're not developing your team because you're doing these financial things. And so that was really the exciting thing to me, was this realization that it just happened to be a passion of mine. It made a lot of logical sense that we could do it from the outside and use that forum to help build the team. So part of what we do is meet with the businesses, not only the owner, but if they want, the management team, to really help develop the team around these topics. So it doesn't have to go through the business owner to tell someone else the significance. That just comes across like, you're just telling your team to help make me more money, right? Mm-hmm. But if we come from the outside and say, hey, a professionally run business looks like this, and here's your role as the head of sales, you need to step up, or here's your role on the ops team, you need to step up, and here's what that would look like. And that's received very differently than the business owner coming across like they're just telling everybody to help them make more money.
Right. My next question was going to be, how does this differ? How do you differentiate yourself from a traditional accounting service? I think you just answered that question for the most part. So in your business, is there specific channels, specific industries that you concentrate on more than others?
Yeah, we work a lot. I mean, just due to the nature of them, we work a lot with digital marketing agencies. They're typically run by a creative type. They're able to sell their passion. They really have an eye for their craft, and so they're able to do some amazing work. But again, the financial part becomes kind of an afterthought. And what we see a lot, and so we're not exclusively able to help those types of companies. We can help anything. Look, I've got manufacturing companies were my very first companies. So I understand the whole kind of gamut of different styles of companies, but we end up working a lot usually with a visionary type person in that business running it. And they need someone, maybe the integrator that they're working with, the person who's operating the day-to-day or helping manage that, is an ops person. They're focused on the team. They're focused on other elements of the business, but they may not have the financial background to lead that part of the business, or they just don't have the time to do it.
Right. And in dealing with creatives, I mean, I actually took a course on a seminar on how to deal with creatives. It's a whole different language, and it's more of an emotional thing than it is a real, than the technical part of it, getting into the, all the technical issues and so finances for them in some sense is like, it's definitely a foreign language to them. And when you're communicating with them also, it's like you have to kind of communicate in a way that doesn't make them feel like they've screwed up or, you got to learn how to communicate with people. So what I'm leading to with that whole thing is that one of the things that I read about you in your LinkedIn profile is that you try to simplify things so that people can understand the financial process, the whole process, all the words, and communicate, so you can communicate with them even better. So tell us a little bit about that process and how that works.
Yeah. And to that point, I mentioned earlier, like training with the team, with the business owner. So again, we're giving them a fin score. So we're giving them a simplified way to look at their financials. That's a great starting point, and it's a great way to identify what areas they need to grow. But one of the things I tell every business owner that I talk with about this is that, you really need to understand what the percentage breakdown of how you spend your money is. And so I call that the simple profit formula. I always say, hey, you should understand how you make money on the back of a napkin. What I mean by that is, you know how much your revenue is, what percentage of that is going to, your outside vendors, cost of goods or cost of sales. But then take it a step further. Everybody knows to think about that and think about their margin. What about looking at your sales and marketing as a percentage? What about looking at your labor as a percentage? What about looking at your other general overhead as a percentage? And really kind of understanding. And so I've got a client I was talking to earlier this week. He knows that his labor percentage needs to stay around 30%. Well, that gives him a tremendous amount of power to say, hey, if we're at this size next year, here's what we can afford labor-wise. But if we're at this size, we can only afford this much. And that's a really, really powerful planning tool. And it's as simple as what I just described. Looking at how you've done that historically, how much have we spent? And what I love to do when I'm thinking that way is start with the bottom line percentage and work my way up from there. In other words, I need at least 15% profit, or I need 20% profit. And the profitability is dependent on the model. But I would say that one of the things that unfortunately has happened to small businesses is seeing all this kind of VC Silicon Valley type of thought process come into. It's like, well, I can't make money because I'm growing. That's nonsense. You can't afford not to make money, right?
Right.
And so if I start with this idea of like, well, I have to spend what I have to spend, and I either make money or I don't, you're doing it wrong. Flip it upside down. Start with how much money you need to make. And I would say 10% is kind of breaking even. 15 to 20% is where we should be. And then ask yourself, like, okay, well, what can I afford based on that?
Right.
And, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Profit First, but that's kind of a profit first type of concept where he says, hey, basically I can only afford, it's like my personal budget. I can't make $5,000 a month and have a $4,500 mortgage.
Right.
And that doesn't work.
Right.
So by definition, right, you kind of get boxed in a little bit. And business owners, unfortunately, as they start getting a little bit of money in the bank, they start to grow a little bit, kind of start to tell themselves some different version of that story. Like they can afford to go for a period of time, breaking even. And, I don't advocate that. I don't believe that's really a good sound practice for anyone.
No, absolutely. It's not where we got into business in the first place, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So basically, what you're doing with Profit First is you're kind of re-engineering or reverse engineering the whole process. So you're talking about the end game and then working your way back to the beginning and how you get to that end game.
Correct.
I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and putting those big chunks in percentages, right? So that because based on percentages, you can then set a budget based on where you're going with revenue. And if revenue doesn't deliver, by having a percentage, instead of, what happens instead is you say, well, this is the team that I need because we're going to do 2 million this year. Well, then you're trending at 1.5. What do you do, right? But if you have a percentage and you say, I can spend 30% of my budget on labor, well, when that 30% is of 2 million, you know what that number is. If it starts to trend down toward 1.5, you can do the math and say, man, I something's got to change because I can't survive doing 40% or 45% of my revenue going toward labor. It doesn't fit my business model. And it forces your hand a little bit differently to make changes and disconnects it. If you ask a business owner, what would happen if you shrink your team? They start thinking in terms of people. And I'm not saying by no means do I advocate taking lightly letting go of people, but it starts to change your discipline and your thought process as you look at it from this other angle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people, are so concerned with what is happening right now that they fail to plan ahead. Yeah. And everything that you said, I mean, in my mind, what I'm hearing is like this whole planning thing and understanding what your numbers are. And in order for you to be able to plan, you have to understand what those numbers are. And then for you to grow, you have to understand, what your numbers are as well. And the percentages, like you said, I think that's very interesting. So tell us, so you've been working with a lot of clients over your time. Can you give us maybe some examples of some people that you worked with or companies you've worked with and what your process has done to help their businesses? You don't have to give us names, just, give us some ideas of real life type stuff that you're working with.
Yeah. So, one example, like I said, let's say a digital marketing company specializes in video production. And in that particular case, it's a project-based business. So one of the big things is making sure that you have a common language from your entire sales process all the way through to the financials. So in that particular business, they're doing some work with bigger companies in certain cases, and sometimes they're doing a one-off video and sometimes they're doing 10 videos. The problem was the way they had their financial structured and their overall process structured was everything's being communicated in terms of job instead of number of videos. And so that sounds like a simple thing. And when we set up our business, this is the common kind of mistake we can make of just always kind of, bolting on the next process or adding people. And we let our terminology and the way we operate kind of just organically occur instead of thinking it through. The penalty comes for them in the sense that they're not able to manage their team productivity based on number of videos. If they're doing it based on jobs and everybody in the team is doing this kind of, well, okay, but that one doesn't count because it's 10 videos. That's different than this one. You end up without a common language. And so when we're talking about what's on our pipeline and they're talking about how many leads aren't the important thing. It's how many potential videos are we talking about, right? And then we look at the back end of the financials and we say, okay, you did, let's just say, for example, $100,000 in revenue. Okay, but how many videos did you do? We need to look at it almost like a conveyor belt where from the very front of the business and the leads and the prospects all the way through to the financials and even cash in the bank is looked at in one common language. And so the best way to do that is based on either a work unit, if you're kind of a project-based company, or if you're just a pure services business, it may be based on the number of people on your team or hours worked, right? It's some sort of a work unit. And by doing that, it allows company to now I can kind of right size all the way through the chain. And I can start to say, well, if I want to have, 10 videos done every month, what kind of team do I need to be able to work it through the different production? And now everybody can start to, in the operations side of the business, start to go like, well, hey, there's no way we've only got 2 people on this team. There's no way we can get 10 videos done every month. And so now we're having a really productive conversation about the sales side, the ops side, and ultimately what it would mean from a finance standpoint. So that's one huge thing that we work on with companies. It's a very kind of data focused way of doing it. Unfortunately, most businesses with a visionary creative type, they're never going to do the hard work in the weeds. And that's why we're not a DIY service. In other words, we're not just going to give you a list of things to do and say, good luck. Here's what we would do if we were you. We're not in that game.
Right.
We're in the weeds. We're doing it for you. And so that's a big one. And then I would say, another example of that is if you've got more of a recurring revenue model is really looking at churn, right? One of the things that is really important if you've got a recurring revenue model is understanding like, hey, I know what it takes maybe to generate business, but what's happening with my leaky bucket? What's falling out of the back end? And people are going to ask, if you ask a salesperson or account manager, they're going to tell you a story. But let's look at the data and let's understand, like, is it certain types of clients? Is it what's the correlations that we can determine that may be a warning sign for this type of business? Maybe it's by industry, maybe it's by size, maybe it's the certain type of offer that you're helping them with. Let's look at what they all have in common and see if we can understand. Maybe we're no longer serving a certain industry, or there's weakness in that industry that's affecting us in ways we're not understanding. And the nice people at that company don't want to tell our account manager, hey, we're struggling and we're out. So it's things like that we do that is kind of, again, that's why it's financial in nature, but it's not strictly finance, if that makes sense.
That's what it sounds like. So in other words, from what I understand from what you're saying is that a lot of people in business, they'll make maybe knee-jerk decisions, or maybe because they have this great idea or they think it's a great idea and they get so invested in it that they jump into it without looking at the finances first. And what you're talking about is really putting the finances first, working backward to determine whether or not it's a viable opportunity and what it's going to take to make that opportunity work. And maybe sometimes it's one of those things where it isn't going to work. You need to walk away.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the things for my very first business that was a turnaround, the very first thing I did day one as CEO was eliminate what was at the time 70% of our revenue. Because I had come to the mathematical conclusion that there was just no way we could make money in that part of the business. And no matter what it meant, it was slowly killing the business. So I was no longer as scared to kill the business, if that's what it came to. But I knew confidently at some size, this remaining 30% of the business will thrive. And so that's exactly what I did. I ended up having to eliminate that. And so it's an ugly truth to face. But the reality is you have to let the numbers have their say, right? And it doesn't mean the numbers are everything. By no means am I somebody who says, just go in a hole and I'll feed you some numbers and that's the only thing you get to use to make a decision. But business owners typically understand the market. They understand what's working, what's not, and they understand when things aren't quite right. We help put the data to that through the numbers and say, hey, this is the reality of what's happening.
I love it. It's very interesting. Yeah, I mean that 70% could have cost you an entire business, really. And I've seen people
Absolutely.
actually do that, where they put all their energy, all their effort into that because it's a thing that they really. I mean, it's a lot of your business. I mean, on the
Yep.
top end, but on the
Yep.
bottom line, it's killing you, and that takes away from the time and the energy that you could put toward that other 30% that turns out to be the most profitable part of your business. So I
Absolutely.
love that.
And to that point, I'll just say that's why that business is still here today. I mean, I still own that company, 22 years later, because I made that difficult choice. That company would have died. I mean, to your exact point, when you're chasing revenue in that way, you get into that mindset of like, well, I just got to chase revenue to solve this problem. You're really, I mean, you're rolling the dice on the entire company at that point. And at some point, you're gonna you're gonna crap out. And because the reality is, there's risk associated with not making money. That's why I say you cannot afford breaking even is not an option in my mind, because there's so much risk involved with just the inherent ongoing nature of a business that if you don't have the resources, you're not making money. You look up one day and you made your last bad choice and it's over.
It's over. It's done. Yeah. So, and it's a difficult choice to make. It's a difficult decision. And that's why folks need to work with Colin Sanburg. It's because you can help them through that kind of process and give them a little bit better understanding of what is at stake if they don't make this move. And in your case, the 70% move. Hey, listen, we're getting to the end of our time together. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, I think, a lot of what we talked about today, it's really one thing I will say: work with talented people, surround yourself with people who are capable, but you as a business owner owe it to yourself to be knowledgeable about your numbers. That's something I'm very passionate about. I've got a lot of entrepreneur friends who, before I was doing this business, I was giving them a hard time. Like, hey man, you got to know your numbers. Yeah. The reality is, that's part of this job and this career that you've undertaken. And you're not being a real pro if you just kind of let that be some shortcut that you keep taking over and over again. And so that's just, to me, that's kind of throwing down the gauntlet. It's a bit of a challenge to people out there. It doesn't mean you have to become a finance expert. It does not mean you have to go to Wharton and get your MBA. It just means, you've got to step your game up from wherever you are today, get better and continue working on that and see that as part of that inevitable journey as an entrepreneur.
Fantastic. Colin, I can tell that you're very knowledgeable in what you do, but not only that, I can tell just from this conversation, you're very passionate about what you do as well. So if our audience would like to get in contact with you to learn more about Colin, learn more about your service, FinElevate, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is I'm sure you'll put in the show notes. It's just www.finelevate.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Colin Sanburg, and reach out. So one of the things I do is just to throw it out there is we offer a 45-minute call. We call it the Deep Dive 45. I promise you it is zero pitch. I'm not going to try and sell you anything. I'm not going to try and convince you to work with me. It is truly just to help people take a quick look at your business, throw some different ideas and suggest some things that you could be looking at differently. And I try to put out good karma in the world. So I know that, I've done this before and had people recommend a friend, and the friend ends up becoming a client. So it's not really a lead thing for me. It's much more of just doing the right thing and trying to help people, and hopefully it'll help some business owners. So look me up and let's book it and let's do it.
Let's do it. Sounds great, Colin. Thank you so much for being on our show today. You're a wonderful guest. Hey, folks, that's all we have for today. So thrilled you could be with us. Business Breakthroughs is sponsored by Titan Media Works. Check us out at titanmediaworks.com. That's works spelled WORX. And also check out our other great hosts on the Small Business Delivered Network at smallbusinessdelivered.com. Until next time, make sure you know your numbers. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Take care.